Good evening, good evening, good evening, and welcome both to our online audience and to all of you who have braved the slush to join us here this evening. My name is Taminga O'Donnell, and it is my great pleasure to introduce this third museum talk here at MUNCH. The purpose of this series, initiated by our director, Tone Hansen, when she started here a year and a bit ago, was to create a forum where we could come together and discuss some of the issues facing us as museum professionals, but also our wider local context here in Oslo. We have therefore been in dialogue with a number of different institutions, including UKS, OKA, Oslo Kunstforening, Nitja, Fotogalleriet, Podium, Kunstnernes Hus, and the Norwegian Association of Curators. With them, we have looked at who to invite, but also which questions we wish to explore from our various perspectives. Elvira Dyangani Ose was a guest that many of us wanted to see back in Oslo. I say back because Elvira over the years has become a surreptitious friend of Norway, Norgesvenn, which is a label granted by Norwegian tabloid press in the olden days to any celebrity who graced our shores more than a few times. So Elvira, you are in esteemed company with Bonnie Tyler, Samantha Fox, 50 Cent, and Kofi Annan. And if you keep this up, you'll be getting the famed Norwegian woolly jumper. I think I first met Elvira on what might have been her first visit to Oslo when she was at Creative Time, and we were looking to collaborate on Munch Museet on the Move. I'm not sure of the year, but since you had a newborn at the time, it should be fairly easy to date. Since then, you have returned to Norway to be the external examiner on the MA in curatorial practice in Bergen, and to sit on the Lise Wilhelmsen Art Award jury at Henny Onsdag, which Tone initiated when she was director there. I seem to be only doing the sort of Norway-centric parts of your very impressive CV. So to continue that vein, you were close to Norway as curator of the Gothenburg International Biennial of Contemporary Art. Then a bit further away from Norway, in London, as director of the showroom, curator of international art at Tate Modern, and lecturer in visual cultures at Goldsmiths. You were even further away from Norway as part of the Thought Council at the Fondazione Prada, which I assume is in Milan and not just in the mind. And even further away from Norway as artistic director of the Lumumbashi Biennial in Congo, DRC. And you've done loads of other things, which are listed as part of the bio on the website for this talk, but they're so far away from Norway that I'm going to skip them. And that includes a PhD at Cornell, which is an ocean away. But you're here now, back in Oslo, to explore your notion of the radically public museum, the possible museum, based on your experience and your most recent role as director of MACBA in Barcelona. Before I invite you onto the stage, a word about the format this evening. We're exploring this format, which is sort of hybrid, so online and in this room. And as ever, we're open to your feedback and your complaints. We will have a 15-minute presentation and then a 20-minute conversation between Tone and Elvira, and then 20-minute Q&A where you're very welcome to ask questions of both our guests. We have to stick to the timeline, as afterwards our dear colleagues need to clear the room and set up for the opening of Corpus Infinitum, which was an exhibition that Elvira initiated at MACBA and which you're all welcome to afterwards, so sort of pre-preview. Okay, I'm not going to wrap it on. It does give me enormous pleasure to welcome the delightful, smart, funny, genuinely caring, incredibly well-dressed person that is Elvira Dyangani Ose to the stage. Welcome!
Let me hug you. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for having me back. I am indeed a great lover of this country, and particularly of this art scene. I'm doing this thing that the youngsters do, which is to have my notes on my cell phone. It made me very contemporary, but what happened is also that sometimes I lost track of where I put them. So anyhow, it's really exciting to be back, as I was saying, as a beloved of this art scene. And I'm also very happy and not just to be part of this conversation, a series of conversation, but to be part of like a long dialogue, which is not between Tone and myself, but also largely with the local scene here. As you have seen, Elvira Dyangani Ose, currently director at the Museum of Art Contemporani de Barcelona, MACBA, and very delighted that this coincides with the presentation of Corpus Infinito, which is also a conversation with artists over a period of time, Arjuna Newman and Denise Ferreira da Silva. As I was saying, very delighted to be here and thank, of course, Tone and also Tominga for having me here, Anne for making me come back, and many others that have hosted me today. Because what I understood this moment is also to acknowledge context. And context is a very important thing to me too, and to what we're trying to build now in Barcelona. So one of the things that we were considering, and let me see if I can do this gently, is to talk about context. I could talk about many, many things, and I hope to bring some more knowledge about what MACBA constitutes. But I decided when I was applying to the role to use this sentence. I leave you some moments to get to it. But if you read it, and we were to consider, for instance, this Troyos statement in the museological context, history will be the history of art, the academic history will be the art institutions, and every side of cultural production, and the professional historian's role will be shared in various degrees of capacity and responsibility between several experts, let's say, that constitute the agents of the daily experience that take place in museums. So artists, museum directors, head of departments, curators, conservators, archivists, educators, and so on and so forth. Central to this thought is the fact that, at least in theory, museums have long acknowledged what Troyos calls here the potential artisans in their history-making processes in the pursuit of articulating the core of a specific collective agency and values. And this sense of the collective agency is what made me also very delighted to be here, because it's this collective agency that I believe the role of these talks are trying to envision and put forward. So when I thought about what the museum could signify, I took on to recognize visitors, or better say, viewers, users, participants, neighbors, skaters. As you know, MACBA is a great spot for skating. If you didn't know, you know now. Tourists, communities, even the clueless passerby, as its raison d'être, as the nucleus of a network of concentric circles around which all activities and missions of the future museum and the future of the museum evolve. And this is MACBA. This is MACBA within the Raval, so you have a sense of how the neighborhood is constituted. It was created in a space where there were other houses, and a part of this, which is the old charity house, that now is a cultural center. And the interesting bit about this is that we are hoping, or when it was built in the 90s, was hoping to generate a cohesiveness, a social cohesiveness that I think is still due to reach its fulfillment, right? And what is interesting about this is that for me, there was in 1995, we soon will celebrate the 30th anniversary of the institution. There was what is called cultural agreement, a pact, no? That the government of the city, the government of the region, Catalonia, and a private foundation decided to sign. But to me, there was something much more important than that create the condition of possibility for the institution to emerge, which is let's say, the vernacular arena that make possible MACBA to exist. No? Not only these new communities that populate the rooms of the space, but also the areas, the counterculture, the manifestations that took place in those years previous to what it was called the Cultural Olympiada, no? Which was a way in which the city of Barcelona condensed many movements, many countercultural movements, many artistic collectives and forms of art entrepreneurship to consider what was this all about. And to me, the knowledge, the acknowledgement of that particular art scene made possible what we consider today as the context in which the MACBA was built, right? This is the condition of possibility for an institution to emerge. That's as clearly as we have as a structure. So the aim was to create this or escape those particularities, no? The historically defined left and right-wing parties, to embrace the culture as a galvanizer of a sense of togetherness for a greater good, for the sake of a healthier public culture, and to embrace the condition of possibility of a museum to emerge, the birthplace of a most experimental, transdisciplinary aspect, practices, intergenerational discourses, and aesthetics that then constitute the MACBA as a whole. And what is important for me, or was important in the making of that, was also to situate the museum at the core of this relationship. But the museum thought as a possible aphasia, as a possible place that, this you see here, an intervention in the space of the museum. Think that, for instance, the museum comes from a moment in the late 1990s to 2000 as a space of radical institutionalization, of a space of that was called the new institutionality. In some times where the presence of communities was also subsumed to the authority of the director, but also it offered a space to reconsider what belonging and appropriation mean. And here you see some images of the square that is in front of the museum. In a particular, I urge you, if you have the chance, to enter into this beautiful clip in which you see, I cannot show it to you because we have very little time, but it shows how, with these elements in the space, people could make configuration just to be together. So togetherness as a great element linked to the museum. No? And this sentence refers to that. Nothing related to the museum is any longer evident. And the task of the museum in the coming year is to reinvent the institution. Right? These are the notes for a possible museum, which is the way that I came to call the project that we did in the museum. And at the end of the day, at the end of the presentation, I will reveal what we were hoping for with that. But it began with a number of conversations with the team, a number of conversations with agents of the scene to ask them, what kind of museums do you want? What kind of museum have you dream of? How can the museum be more permeable to the local art scene? In which way can a collection also engage with the ways in which we see the world? Not only how the world is framed within the poetic intention of every work, but also how that poetic intention can lead us to see and understand the world differently. I always use this sentence that I love, and unfortunately it's not mine, but I wish it was, which is from a colleague called Jais Hernandez Velasquez. She's a theorist from Goldsmiths, and she reminds us, as we look at the power of the story in the case of Jean-Michel Troyot, that artists are better placed and better equipped to tell the history not the way it happened, but the way it felt. And I believe very much in that. The way things feels make us understand the world through that experience, through that interpretation. So I thought that the presentation of the collection needed to, for sure, allow let's say, a certain dramaturgy of the museum to be changed, to be transformed, and at the same time be emancipatory and transformative. So here you see the way that we operate with the collection, where you see the signs. The show that we have now for the collection is called Poetic Intention, and it looks literally to consider what will happen if we were to think about taking the artwork from the language the institution has chosen for it. And it looks at a definition that Eduard Glissant started in where he was talking about how the language sometimes is capable to betray the poem. Betray the poem as a sort of aphasia that doesn't fully deliver what the artwork would like to say or what the poem would like to say, well, Eduard Glissant will say. And to us, to consider how the dramaturgy of the museum, how when the museum tells you, go this way, go that way, found this thing, read about these things, somehow gets on the way of your relationship with the aesthetic experience that the work promise. So this poetic intention is there, and also for us is also the way in which we change the dramaturgy. So every year, even if the show doesn't change dramatically, we change some of the content of the show, we change the way in which we can work with the images, and you see here the opening show. No, we change the way of the experience of the show. We readdress the image making of the show in order to renew people's imaginary around the collection. But we also think, and these are some images, what are the ways in which people use the space and challenge also that within this new sense of the dramaturgy. But perhaps for the conversation today, one of the key issues is how we think about the context and who we want to accompany us throughout the journey of museum making or history making, if we are to go back to Troyos' essay and Troyos' quote. Here you have Teresa Lanceta and Nicolas Malevé project, Los Oficios del Raval, which was made with the Department of Education of the museum, but also with the students and professors and teachers, no, the cluster of the Institute Miquel Tarradell, nearby the museum. It's a project that took 2 years to produce, and it creates a sense of confidence and elaborate on the labor and the kind of working conditions that people in the neighborhood have. And also, of course, including people in MACBA, and our colleagues, other experts, but it also allows for the youth participating in this project to imagine themselves within the neighborhood differently. That means that, for instance, when we were doing the exhibition of Lanceta, these kids were the ones that were introducing the exhibition to, in some cases, not all the time, but the majority of the visits to the show were introduced by these kids that have for 2 years worked with the artists. Because of the work they did with the artists, Teresa Lanceta, but also with Nicolas Malevé, they started a reinterpretation of the neighborhood in codes that talk about pride, that talk about previous history of people that have migrated to Barcelona, that live now in El Raval, and that perhaps the urban experience and the daily routines and vicissitudes of these people were not able to perform or not were able to memorialize. There is no time for memory in everyday's business, right? And to me, what was most special of this was to visit in the museum through the experience of these kids that have been transformed by participating in this project. And I was telling them, and I told myself, we owe to this kid to be able to somehow be permeable to their desire, to their wishes, to their hopes. That's the only way the museum can be transformative. That's the only way that the museum can be radically public. When you are like here, like MUNCH Museum, like MACBA, is a museum that belongs to the municipality. We have a larger consortium in which other members participate. But the most important thing is that we have a public mandate. We had to be public. So what does it mean to be radically public? It means to offer something else of what you already do. And I was thinking there is something for me very important in Barcelona that changed, I think, a lot before the pandemic, but I think that the pandemic augmented in a way, which was this possibility of appropriating, getting a space that you belong, transforming the space and creating a space where you're going to encounter yourself. You encounter yourself, and in the case of the museums, you encounter the artwork, you encounter others that are looking for that. And in that sense, for us, was very important not only to work as we did in the Department of Education with other groups in the city. We collaborate a lot with people in the neighborhood. So to that scale, we are a very little, we adopt that little sense of a small library, but at the same time, we want to be in the bigger narrative of the contemporary artistic practice. We want to be part of that conversation as well. And I think it's possible to maintain that crazy, sometimes schizophrenic stage. But this project, Jardí Ambulant, started to resolve the first, right? There has been many projects, and a recent project, I sent this before we open, I sent this PowerPoint before we open our last project, which is called Cançó per a molts moviments, Song for Many Movement, which belongs to Audre, is entitled after the book of Audre Lorde, the beautiful poet, lesbian warrior, as she defined herself. And in that project, most of the things that I'm telling you now are bringing them back together. Not only what we're trying to do with the Jardín Ambulante, which is like a mobile garden, so to speak, in which we offer a space within the institution to do a community project. And it's a space where the museum doesn't have a say of what is going to happen. It's a space that is self-run by communities, and the communities determine the methodology and processes of work. And because of that methodology, we reach to the opportunity to really engage much more with something that perhaps allowed us to change the methodology in the bigger building or the dramaturgy of the project in the bigger building. So what happens in this part of the project is very important. And here, a little note on the definition of the possible museum, which is not, as you can see here, a projection of an ideal museum or some unfulfilled previous desire, is what can be done within this frame of possibilities that open up and are still restricted for whatever exists. And this is very important. The museum has limits, and because it has limits, you can go over them, you can overcome it. But at the same time, you have to be pragmatic in work within that structure. It's not an avant-garde of an impulse to produce everything anew and reject the past. It's not a conservative way of perpetuating everything higher left. But is established with this sense of affection to take care of something, not only to make it grow bigger, but to make it grow better, right? And that's, for us, is crucial. And I don't know if I had this 2 minutes video. Yes. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes.
Oh my God, the possible museum in our hands. I was struck while you were talking, Elvira, about how important space is. Mm-hmm. And space in the sense of very practical, giving space and giving room and giving a voice. Mm-hmm. And the possible museum actually also being a radical place for giving space to voices that wouldn't necessarily be heard, like in the neighborhood of Raval,
yes,
as you were talking about. And it also strikes me that it's also dealing with urbanism, as the museum is placed exactly within a structure that is already existing. I mean, this museum is part of a whole new neighborhood. It was a harbor, now it's placed here, and the neighborhood is growing with the museum, while your museum is really placed within a structure that is already there, and that consists of very many different kinds of neighborhoods surrounding it. And this urban structure that you're dealing with, taking it into the museum, I was curious if you could say something about that.
Yes, so one of the important things about Raval is that it means literally the outskirts of Barcelona. No? And if you know a little bit the city, part of the city to that side, no, going down to the harbor, that side, like the right side of the city, no, of the Ramblas, was like very much an area of agriculture, was very much the outskirts. And in fact, I was telling colleagues yesterday that there was something called the neighborhood plan. No? And the neighborhood plan, Pla de Barris, was something that was done to create a series of imagery, no? Like image making around the city of Barcelona, and to basically, for the second time, to look at areas in the city that were perhaps misconceived or misregistered in terms of photography, and they create this space to generate that sense. No? And most of the neighborhoods that are part of that list and they are going to be part of a show that we do next summer, they are in the outskirts of the city. But Raval is also part of that, because Raval it still has some of the circumstances by which that is problematic, no? Like this sense of like a space that hasn't been explored in the way that it should, voices, as you were saying, that hasn't have the platform that they needed or that was conceived or they should have. And the way that we wanted to work with them was to show that sense of the role that we have in public space. No? Like, in fact, when we started Jardín Ambulante, we worked with Santiago Cirujeda, which also was part of the Gothenburg Biennial, and Santiago Cirujeda's team, Recetas Urbanas, is one that uses public space as a platform to give agency to communities, right? And for us, it was very important for people to understand, as we did with the students in Miquel Tarradell and in this project, Los Oficios del Raval, is to give a sense of agency, to provide them with a platform where they could transform the platform and empower themselves to present their own voice in their own rights. No? And ask about public space, ask about what the museum can do to be more permeable to those wishes. So I don't know if I answered your question.
Yeah, I think it's very interesting, because I think you mentioned Lancetta and Maleva. Who's been running this project, and it's part of the educational program.
Yes, because.
And how do you relate that? Because it's historically it's division between education and curating.
And that division is one of the most difficult to overcome, but I think it's absolutely necessary these days. You cannot conceive a museum without that aspect of public engagement. Some people will call mediation, some people will call participation, but I think those are only, if you think about inclusion, equality or equity, diversity, and alternative histories within the context of a museum or the context of history making a museum, institutional building, you need to have a space for that. And what happened with the education program, from my perspective, is that they are in the street with the communities. They are in the museum, working on the floor, getting a sense. That is one of the my favorite activity in the museum is one called How the Museum Sound.
And how it sounds.
How does it sound? How the museum sound. And the funny thing is that it always happened a little bit earlier than 1 hour earlier than the museum opened. But you feel like there is kids screaming everywhere, sounding, crazy plastic tube, engaging with the column, the floor. There is something about this nature of the museum being reduced as something softer, permeable, right? Something that is because you have seen MACBA, in the middle of that neighborhood. It's white, it's big. It's, you know, somehow it's beautiful, but it's bombastic. No? And I was saying when we were working with these kids, I was saying to them, please don't think about the building from the outside. Think about the building from the inside. The team is the museum. Institutions are individuals, right? More than buildings, right? And what happened is that they belong to that. They really show us the path to what the museum needs to be. So a place that recognizes them as a place that they can appropriate. And what I will feel very sorry if after that experience they will never come back. They will think that because they were working with Teresa Lanceta or they were participating in that show, they had somehow like a temporal pass to that experience when in fact the museum belongs to everybody, no?
Yeah. We have a similar project running here that I think is also quite radically new, and it's called Come Think With Us. And it's an exhibition made for children, although you find a lot of grown-ups also around in there, because it's a space to kind of learn and explore and to figure out what a museum can be. And we say that it's a space where no rules apply, or no museum rules apply, because, you know, traditionally a museum asks you to be quiet, don't touch, don't run, don't, you know, behave yourself. It's a very kind of disciplinary in that sense. To break these rules is also a bit of a challenge. But I'm curious about this. What happens to the role of the director if you are having a radically public
space
museum?
I mean, so you remember Thelonious Monk or any jazz? I think there are different kinds of leadership, right? And you don't have to be, you know, like I think there was this sense, particularly in the new institutionality moment, where the figure of the director as a leadership role, setting out an agenda. To me, it's like a new version of a sense of an individual understanding, an individual agenda that in a way it has a place in the museum. Let's say I'm responsible for things that happen in the museum. It's not a corporate, a cooperative, right? We have rules. We belong together to a structure, right? But at the same time, I think it's important to create a platform for people to express their own desire. I feel like the more you set out an umbrella, a conceptual umbrella, a participatory umbrella for your colleagues to have a space of evolution and development, the more you receive back, no? And the same goes to...
Has it changed you?
It changed the music. Oh my God, yes, of course. Every day of my life changed me. This trip to Norway changed me because I learned certain things that perhaps they not changed me radically, but they changed me in my everyday. No?
Yeah.
And I think that's the important bit. I haven't learned Norwegian, but it changed me. No, what I mean is to say that I never, there was a moment I was in London.
I'm just asking because I'm curious about this kind of radical change also that comes with this radical openness.
I'm gonna get to this in the sense that I think it changed your view of leadership.
Yeah.
Right? I tend to say that for me, leadership, I see leadership in the museum role, and I don't know if anybody will agree or not. How many people in the audience play basketball? Okay, not a famous sport. I understand.
It's a wrong sport. Ask how many is doing cross-country skiing, and that's not a team sport. It's individual.
Yeah, but team sport, right? Yeah. But for a long time, I was a basketball referee, right? And if you understand basketball referee, it has to do with interpretation of the game. It doesn't have to be about judging the game. And that's, for me, what is important. So my kind of leadership in the museum, it has to be about interpretation. In order to do that, you have to know the rules very, very well. Yes. Because the proposal is to learn the rules and go over it. Right? Yes. Be able to overcome the limits of the museum to propose spaces in which those boundaries can be open. No? I think most of the how you say grietas? Now I forgot. How you say cracks. Thank you, my friend. So when I work, I always look at those cracks in everything because all the structures all of them, no matter how perfect they were conceived, had cracks. And through those cracks, you find ways to see the structure differently and to be able to produce something that is radical to the structure itself. So what I try to bring up is something that is already embedded in, is a potential in the structure. But it needed the crack to come out, and it needed somebody to be able to see that crack to make it out.
So working in Barcelona is a very different experience than working in London.
And I love it.
Yeah.
I miss my London friends.
No, but I mean,
my London scene, but I love being in Barcelona.
Yeah.
I learn about institutions in Barcelona. I learn about artists' needs, material condition, working conditions in Barcelona. I learn about what it means to become a curator, what it means to take care of a structure, to make it possible, the importance of private and public organization in the making of an institution. I learn about the scene and the countercultural scene, and going back to Barcelona has always been my dream, so I'm very happy to be at MACBA. Yeah.
I guess it also has to do with durability, because it's that kind of investment that you're talking about, this radical change also that within the institution and the use of the institution maybe. It also requests that you spend a lot of time.
Yes.
You can't come in and out like
I know, but
curator.
you have to tell that to the people that hired me. So they had me back many years. No, but you're right. I mean, I think we are in a moment of evolution.
If you're going to create trust, you have to kind of...
Yeah. I mean, and you're absolutely right. We are in a moment of evolution for the institution. No? We're in a moment of transformation. But that has to do with something that already is embedded in the potential of the institution to be. No? This possible museum clearly set out a journey, right, in which what you're living has to do with what you already are. No? So to me, part of what we're trying to recover at MACBA is also that sense of its own history, but also a possibility of overcoming that history to creating something anew, something that was embedded there. And that needs time. I always say that I am working for the MACBA that will become, not the MACBA that is now. Because only when you see it that way, you're able to create a system for that structure to grow. No? So you were talking about, for instance, how you make a radical change in terms of leadership of an institution, of a team. And that could be the one, no? like allowing a platform that grows within a structure. And you have to have the structure really, really fit so then you can see the crackers.
Yeah.
And then something else. No, don't you like when that doesn't happen so often now, because like all the urban planning is so pristine. But before there was always a crack where a little air was coming out. Like those moments for me are amazing. Or when you have a tree that all of a sudden pump the cement and the root of the tree are coming out. This is the potential of anything that we build. Is rooted in that.
Yeah. And I mean, we've talked about that previously. Also, it's also, isn't it also has to do with distribution of power?
Absolutely, and being aware of the power is the key to that. I mean, I can offer a platform for my colleagues, I can delegate, but there is a scale in the power, not only the way that they perceive it, but also the way that it's seen. But I also think that generosity is its own kind of power.
Yeah.
So you had to, like allow for all those things to operate. So for instance, we work a lot in networks of solidarity, network among colleagues, the same way that you are considering these talks, not only for MUNCH team and yourself, but also to the scene and the contest here in Oslo. No?
Yeah, I mean, it comes also from a desperate need for having this kind of conversation. And if you can do it in public, it's great, because it opens up, it makes it even bigger and more important for us. And I learn even more. And learning is also about changing and to be open for change and to accept
the museum
what comes.
learns as well, no? As much as the museum disseminate, like I will say like radical pedagogy has to do with that as well, no? It's not unidirectional learning, but also the museum learn of the communities, of individuals, of the governance, of the system. All of that is part of it.
Okay, I have so many more questions.
Oh gosh!
It's actually time for the floor to ask.
Oh God!
To take stage.
Yeah, It was noted. Great. It's lovely to break this unidirectional thing now immediately. So while the rest of you think about questions that you might have, give me a little sign and I'll do my best to distribute the microphone. You were the first one and the fastest one, so here we go.
Thank you so very much. My name is Yakuba Sise. I'm a writer. I've been documenting the African presence for the past 26 years. My question goes to leadership. It's a two-folded question. I'll be very short. Leadership is about power. How has personally your position transformed you? And what has been your work towards the communities that you're talking about?
You want to start?
I saw that was directed to you. So we can both respond, right?
Yeah.
Is that,
yeah.
Yeah.
It's for both of you.
I just want to understand, did you get the question?
Yeah. I did. But because I was looking at you and you were looking at her, I thought she will respond. Sorry.
It's for both of us.
It's for both of us. Yeah, brilliant. Yes. So leadership for me doesn't only start when you are the director of the institution. I think this is very important. You have a leadership role all the time. You always work with a group of people, and sometimes that leadership role is exercised within the context of the group, any group, right? Sometimes you receive the role, sometimes the role affected. And I feel a responsibility of that, and I had felt it before, no? Since I was a curator international art at Tate, while I went through my role in the showroom as a director, and now. Very importantly, there is something also very important in Spain, which is this very little representation of people of colors, of black people, black communities, of non-white communities, to be more straightforward. And that responsibility, I think I carry it always, because I always was the first in something, either first woman, either first black woman, or either a black person. And it hasn't changed me, had made me grow over time. So I don't feel like an immediate change because of the role. I don't feel an immediate change because of the scale. It's part of who I am, no? When Audre Lorde asked about this question that I said before, and she defined herself like a poet, a warrior, a lesbian, no? And she asked, I'm doing my job, are you doing yours? And I feel like that for me was a discovery in early 2000, and I realized that I had a job to do. And the understanding of such leadership is taking on the role.
Yeah, I would say that taking over the Munch Museum from coming from smaller institutions was a great step. Definitely challenging, and but also a fantastic journey, bringing values with me into a larger system, and maybe being able to use that as a platform for an even more open institution. But I've only been here for a year. It's a long process, but so you'll have to follow and see what happens in the future.
Thank you for some really lovely insights, Elvira, and some very good questions, Tone. My greatest experience of cultural industries has been was in the 1990s in London, working in community arts in East London, out of the Half Moon Theatre, if you remember. It's still around, I think. And so my question is based around that, because we did wonderful things with outreach work in the community by giving the community a platform to invite a larger audience into their own cultural events. And you've said a few things about how you invite the community into the museum. I'd like to know something about how you see, what are the possibilities for the museum going out into the community and learning from the community in that way?
No, amazing. And I have to say, like, we do as well. No? The thing is that for a long time, that was the role of particular people within the institution. And my feeling was that the institution as a whole wasn't present, right? Like, we have, Yolanda Jolles, who is our head of education and was a coordinator in education at the time, and she's working with the Mesineras, which is like a group that support women that are linked to drug abuse. is and to the stigma that contribute to. And then was Yolanda's experience in the Department of Education, but at times felt that the museum wasn't there supporting that engagement. We want to be there. We want to be there, and I think the museum nowadays can only be there, can only be relevant if it is relevant for their own community. So breaking those, like going to meet people where they are, you know, as you are suggesting, I think is the most important.
I'm stopping you. Can I? Because there's more questions. Just run.
Okay.
But relevance is important. Sorry. It's,
relevance. Yeah, no worries.
Hello, thank you very much for a passionate talk. The MACBA sounds like a very fun museum to work in.
Yes.
And I'm just wondering, I would like to know more about how you plan on working on your collection displays and how you're going to break those rules that we as art historians all know very well. So, any ideas?
Well, we already had done it. So one thing that we already had done the first try. No, we call it prelude, poetic intention, and I follow these ideas around the poetic intention of the artwork and how it's possible to imagine. So in fact, we divided the show in 4 spaces. No, necessarily there was no dynamic because the previous show was very historical, right? Like from the, let's say, 30s, no? Architecture, anarchists, posters, etc., in the 1930s, in Catalonia till the 1990s, no? And it shows that what they call it, following Aukwin Weser's project, the short century, no? And it happens like that. And to me, when you see that kind of parcours, the most important thing in those parcourses were the discourse, was how I tell you the story and how I bring elements of the story, which are the artworks, to identify a specific context. But to me, that serves as an aphasia to really doesn't fulfill this notion of the modern space as the modern narrative as the one that leads, you know, this sense of completion of the collection. The collections are not complete, and there is a reason for it. And they cannot aspire as they were, you know, like there is this moment that MoMA has in the 60s about opening it up to the world. And both it happens at the same time that in the 2010s, Centre Pompidou did the program of mondialization. The Tate Modern particularly, but also Old Tate, had these acquisitions committee groups for regions. And also you have the project in the Guggenheim, no? Which also was regionally based. No? And all those experiences seems to generate this sense of world building, world making, right? And to me, I felt like we needed to go back to the artwork, and we needed to go back to the one-to-one with the artwork. And that experience for me was more valuable than saying, you know, we have 5,000 words and we're going to show you, what, how many, 200? No, we are going to show you experiences, and you are going to engage with different ways in which the museum deals with language, where the museum deals with time, but through the experiences that you can have, wandering the museum at your own pace, on your own right, no? And engaging with that single word. No? I talk about slow consumption a lot, no? And I say, well, if you experience an artwork one day, for me it's enough. You might need time to ensue, no, what the artworks want to say to you. And to me, that's the change to the collection. But we are looking for more spaces to show other ways to show the collection, yeah. Thank you.
Hi.
Hi.
Thank you so much for your presentation and your work. I have always admired the work that you do. But I have a question which is a little bit more related to contemplation, and maybe following on what you were just saying, because I am formed on classic art history, and the museum as a space of contemplation, although I could never experience that during my youth. And then
Can I ask why you couldn't?
Because I was living in a very or my parents were living in a very remote place. where access to the museum was not allowed, and yet I experienced that through school books. And then I look at the trailer of MACBA, and I feel less and less I belong to these times because of the pace. So I wanted you to elaborate a little bit more on that.
On that last, so this
on
is
this relationship between contemplation of the museum and what it used to be, and the trailer of MACBA.
Well, this okay. So I had to say thank you. So I had to say this video you saw, I love it because it's like a roulette. Not but now this year, as I said, we invite every year. We change the exhibition works. Not all of them, some of them. Within the context of this temporary exhibition of the collection, because it's going to be temporary exhibitions of the collection all the time. I feel like a contemporary museum should have, things moving, because life is that, movement and fluxus. But you had time to go and contemplate the same work for 6 months, sometimes 1 year. And my feeling is that it also, contemplation, the way that it happened in the time you could experience museums, it still can happen. Can happen, yeah? You can go and, for instance, that piece that you were seeing which is not only contemplative, it's also experience that you go through. The piece of Pet Duran, updated, is something that you can go and contemplate for. It has been there for 1.5 years.
But also, Corpus Infinitum is an exhibition that demands contemplation and time, and to experience it physically with your body in that
But that's
space.
the thing, right? Like I wanted to say that. Like, to me, there is a part of the museum. The museum has to be the place where you live memorable experience, right? The first time I understood the importance of the museum was when I visited the Uffizi. And I thought what I thought was my favorite word ever, which was la calunnia di Apelle. And I have seen it represented in books, and I have seen it in the novel from Botticelli, and I have seen it in the art history classes. And then I realized when I turn, I'm going through now. So I turn here the world, and I turn around and I see the world, and it's this big. But I have seen it this big. And then I really, on my feet, because this is so memorable. The importance of seeing something the way the art is intended, the experience, physical, but also through our eyes. I think one of the key issues, and it's relevant because we are not only eyes. One of the things that, what's his name? Maria José Moncian says in Homo Spectator is that we, in the Paleolithic, when they were doing the paintings in the caves, not only was the way of narrating and painting started, also started our role as a human being as spectators. So we are people that sees, but then the experiences now are experiences that bring together, who we are physically as well. So this is last year. This year video, which I didn't bring because they didn't have the translation, the artists are talking about what the possible museum is for them, and it's beautiful.
There's more questions.
More questions.
Well
sorry, I love to talk. Sorry.
Well done, Tone. We have one question in the back, and then
Sorry.
I think that's probably the 2 questions we have time for. So please, in the back.
I love to speak. Can you believe it?
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for your presentation on the MACBA and notes on the museum. Very progressive, interesting, inclusive, and very many other things. You also work with the Tate Modern in London, which is another very diverse city. And at the same time, you have changes in Spain where you see a cleft between Catalonia and the rest of Spain. And cultural institutions are also symbols and markers. You mentioned also that you had considerable funding from the region of Catalonia, and you sort of trying to create the open space. And do you see is there a paradox, or do you find it difficult to work within those frameworks?
within the, so I didn't
So
understand.
yes or no?
I would have to say something. No, I don't find it difficult to work in that paradigm. And the second part of the response is that one thing that we do, and this is the mandate of MACBA, is not only to make possible the dissemination of art and contemporary art and culture, but especially the contemporary art and culture produced by artists in Catalonia. Right? So that's the mandate, and I know that mandate. I think what is interesting there is to start showing through artworks, through aesthetic experience, how many Catalonians are possible through that, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's the beauty of being in an institution like MACBA.
Great.
Short enough?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Hi.
Hi.
Thank you, Elvira, for your presentation.
Had to.
Over here.
Brilliant.
Yes. Thank you for your presentation. My name's Laura Carfor. I just wanted to, I thought it was interesting you talking about the cracks and exploiting those cracks. And I was wondering if you had any more to say about which cracks you see in the museum as an institution, and also if you have like a kind of thought lineage of people who've been exploiting those cracks or maybe creating those cracks.
Sorry, they were a moment like before these last cracks?
There was a lot of...
No, because I couldn't hear you properly, sorry.
So my question is...
Yes.
Which cracks do you see in the museum as an institution? And also, do you have a lineage of people who've been thinking and been working with exploiting those cracks already or creating them?
Okay. Wow, that's not a brief answer question. So we will have to continue over the drinks. But one thing that is very important about what you're saying is that you were talking about the museum in general, right? Not only MACBA, I understand, right? So I feel there is two things to respond to that. And I was saying earlier in the PowerPoint, a museum can only be relevant if it's relevant for the community that serves it, whether it's an immediate community or faraway community, right? As an institution, it had to consider what art is. It has to think about it, redefine it, rethink it. No? We were talking, like if you see the response of who are augmenting, changing, creating, provoking changes in the institutions are people outside of those frameworks, right? And I think the crackers sometimes come from outside. To me, the most important bit is to consider the moment where the institution is, but to create a project for the future. And social council, we have a social council that we need to activate even more. We want to have a youth council that we want to affect the way that institutions think. And only when that has a space, you can understand the relevance of the context, but also only when you are in a network, I think, particularly for MACBA, if it has to be rooted in a network that is city-wise, that is regional-wise, that is nation-wise, that is international-wise. And surviving in these different levels sometimes mean changing aspects of the institution as you go along. And in the way that I do it is through projects and with the team, right? The team adapt to those projects. And I think the beauty of that is that through the project, you can bring people from the outside. So I think relevance is important, and how you put values to the relationships that make that relevance possible. A space for team and these project-based journeys are very important. I always think that the exhibitions are not only things that happen in the museums, are things that happen to the museum, right? So the exhibition is a way to transform the institution from within. Right, and it's so funny because when I was a freelance curator, I was doing that role for the institution, so I have wanted to keep doing it within the institution. Yeah. So you had to read, listen a lot about that. Yeah.
I'm curious about one thing, because do we have time for one more question?
You're the director, you hold all the powers, so you can ask the question.
So I'm using my power now, because talking about this crack and relevance and also the role of what an artwork does to the institution, I would really like to have a question from an artist.
Ah, an artist.
Wow, I was not expecting this to be.
So, artist, you are on the spot.
You're on the spot.
Ask your question now.
I see people
whatever, hold your
sliding down
peace.
in their chairs.
disappearing.
We have.
Or maybe at home. Maybe at
Well,
home.
maybe actually this is.
We did. We did. Thank you.
I would also say that part of performing curatorial care is to let artists respond in their own time, and maybe that time will be outside of this room where we have used up our time.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Tominga. I stand corrected.
Say by the bell.
So I invite you all to go downstairs to the 9th floor to see Corpus Infinitum, which Elvira conceived originally, and then in an hour, back up here for some drinks and some snacks and some more merriment. So please join me in thanking both Elvira and Tone for a wonderful talk. Thank you.
Thank you.